the worst country to defy UN resolutions. I can bet that. If there's any record to disprove that, please let me know. Secondly, the issue of 911 was basically about Afghanistan, but the Western world or the international community ended up going down to Iraq first before going to Afghanistan. You see, we remember the Tora Bora issue involving late Osama bin Laden. If the Western world or the international community had put more emphasis, they had placed more boots on the ground in Afghanistan, by now we wouldn't have been talking about Taliban at all. Because by then they were concentrated in one place, would have gotten rid of them everything. But we forgot about them and went to Iraq because why? There was something personal or peculiar about Iraq and the Republicans.
Can we come back to Ms. Ahmed's question about safety? Do you think this country is safer?
Absolutely not. We're not safer because of this, because of what we've done. And I would say that that Muslims are not safe because of what's happened. To be an ordinary person, to be an ordinary Muslim in this country and the United States is not a safe thing. The question is, who are we? And we are not all safe. No, we are not.
In what way is it not a safe thing to be a Muslim in this country?
It's almost a dirty word in a sense in the United States right now. One of the problems that Barack Obama had at the beginning is people thought he was a Muslim. Nobody questioned the fact that you're using the word Muslim as a pejorative. It's the same in this country, in some, not as badly, but on some levels it's true. Muslim equates violence. The holy religion of Islam is seen as something that has some kind of inherent core of violence within it. That's the legacy of what's happened. You can't be a Muslim. It's very, very difficult to be that. And that, to me, when we talk about are we safer, I'm asking who are we? Muslims are not safe, for one thing.
Richard Perle? True about America?
Yes, first on the general question of whether we're safer, I think it's already been said, and correctly, that Al-Qaeda and elements associated with it are weaker now, far weaker than they were 10 years ago. We have not had the kind of massive attack that they had in mind for us, and they were planning new attacks even as 9/11 took place. And they were planning them, if I can say it again, if they could obtain them with weapons of mass destruction. So the threat was, and I'm afraid remains, significant. Now, every government I know, every Western government, every democracy has gone to enormous lengths to make it clear that our problem with radical Islamist terrorists does not extend to Muslims in general. Every president has said it again and again. Every prime minister has said it again and again. And I really think it is unfair.
Richard, Richard, you're a student of human nature. You understand how human beings work. You can say that with one side of your face, and the other side you're sending out all kinds of signals about it that are totally opposite. And I promise you, on the day, because I used to live around the area in which the World Trade Center went down, I know people, women who used to wear veils, were told on that day, take your scarf off. Don't wear your cap. Be careful going down the street.
Are you surprised by this after 3,000 people had died in New York as the result of those attacks?
Yes, I am. But yes, I am. I am surprised that a whole group of people can be sort of picked off and said, this person, and this person's an enemy. Yes, I am.
Okay.
Two responses to that, David. One, did it make life more difficult for ordinary people in, say, Britain or the United States? And I think it did, because there's absolutely no doubt that British foreign policy, under Tony Blair in particular, was such that it created a lot of anger amongst Muslim communities in the northern part of the country. And all the reports, the Royal Institute of International Affairs report, private intelligence reports which were later leaked, said it was British foreign policy that radicalized these kids. It was not religion as such. It was something very concrete. That's one thing. The second thing that happened, and this is also a consequence of 9/11, that despite all the politicians saying we are not going to let the terrorists change our way of life, they did. People were arrested without trial. There are people in Britain still locked up for 11 years without being tried. Guantanamo, which Obama said he was going to close down, in fact, he's released fewer people than Bush did. And we live almost in a post-legal state. And the third thing is a big increase in what was called Islamophobia. Just hostility to Muslims in general, which has been stopped not by the wars, but which has to a certain extent been halted, not completely, by the huge uprisings in the Arab world for democratic rights, not just against people like Saddam Hussein or Gaddafi. Gaddafi was a very close ally of the Blair government, but in countries like Egypt, where dictatorships had been kept going by the United States with their money, and countries like Saudi Arabia, which are still kept going. And I never believed that a majority of the Muslim populations in all the Muslim world were in any way sympathetic to terrorism. It's a tiny minority, as terrorists always are. And when given the chance, they came out and demonstrated.
Okay. Tariq, if you go on talking about the Arab Spring as you just have, you're going to be labeled a neoconservative.
David Miliband. We'll come to that.
Let me tell you the word that's used a lot when I talk to Muslim constituents, when I go to universities, but also when I go around the world and talk to Muslim communities, whether in universities or elsewhere. The word they throw at me is hypocrisy. That's the word they throw, and they throw it for two reasons. One, they say, you talk about human rights, but what about Guantanamo? They do say that. And they also say, you talk about UN resolutions, but what about Israel-Palestine? Now, people in my position have to accept that those things are said. And that's why I think it's right to be as clear as we can about the centrality of the human rights challenge that we now face in the wake of 9/11. But secondly, Israel-Palestine did not cause 9/11. That is a really wrong thing to say. But if we're interested in puncturing this allegation of hypocrisy in the way we treat international law, then we have to accept that the greatest diplomatic failure in 40 years is the failure to resolve Israel-Palestine. And if we're serious about building a coalition, not just with rulers, but a coalition with millions of Muslims around the world, and we want to show our seriousness, then we have to tackle that Israel-Palestine issue and make sure there is a Palestinian state that they can call home.
All right, let me hold on. One of our audience got a question. There's Chad Davis. Can we just have that question?
My question for the panel then, is the root cause of terrorism the Israeli-Palestinian problem? And if so, would bin Laden have canceled his 9/11 plans if President Clinton had been able to broker peace in the Middle East?
So if there had been peace over Israel-Palestine, would it not have happened?
No, I don't think so. And I think we also have to be very careful about playing into the Osama bin Laden argument that this was about religion, that this was anything to do with Islam or the liberation of the people of the Islamic world. Osama bin Laden was about a violent, anti-Western political philosophy. It had nothing at all to do with religion. Religion is very seldom the problem. It's when religion is used as the excuse for violence, or when the oppression of people is used for political motives in the name of religion, when legitimate expression is limited using religion as the tool. That is where the problem lies. It does not lie with the religion itself.
Can you answer his question, which wasn't about religion, but was about the Israeli-Palestine?
No, I don't think it would be. I don't think it would be there. I think there is a terribly simplistic view that if you solve that one particular problem, everything else will fall domino-like into place. Yes, of course, it is a problem that is used by countries in the region, most notably, I would say, at the moment, Iran, to continue to whip up what it wants in terms of its own foreign policy support. There's no doubt that if we got a solution to the Israeli-Palestinian problem, it would take away a great propaganda tool as well as being a major improvement in itself. But I don't think we should be so naive to believe that if you take away that one problem, people like Osama bin Laden, who hate us because of who we are, would actually go away.
Richard Perle?
Okay, I think first, the dispute between Israelis and Palestinians is only going to be solved when Israelis and Palestinians find a solution. We can't do it, the United Kingdom can't do it, it's got to be done by them, and that's what the UN has mandated, going back to the immediate aftermath of the 1967 war. I've heard a couple of references now to Israel violating UN resolutions. And while Israel is frequently condemned in General Assembly statements and sometimes in various committees, find me the Security Council resolution that Israel is violating. I don't believe they are violating Security Council resolutions. Now, you may think that's because the Security Council hasn't passed the resolutions you'd like to see them pass. But Israel is under an injunction from the UN, as are the Palestinians, to negotiate a settlement, and that's been going on much too long. But Israel is not in violation of UN Security Council resolutions. It just isn't.
You, sir.
Well, I haven't got the facts in front of me, so I'm not sure if I'm totally correct. I do believe that Israel has been violating UN Security Council Resolution 242 since it was passed, and has never been in favor, it never complied with it, and that has been one of the sticking points of the Israel-Palestine conflict.
David Miliband, briefly on that point.
I mean, settlements are illegal in international law, according to law officers that I trust. But let me just come back to Chad's question, because I think it is really important. First of all, I don't think it's the case that if you solved Israel-Palestine, you wouldn't have had 9/11. I don't think that's right. However, I want to take up Richard Perle's point, because he's repeated the formula that people in my position have repeated for 40 years, which is the parties are going to have to solve it themselves. It's actually a formulation that was invented by James Baker in 1991. And I've come to the conclusion that that's wrong. That if we kid ourselves that these two parties, with all the alienation and anger that exists there, are going to sort it out for themselves, they're not. The phrase is, we can't want a solution more than the parties themselves. We do need a we do need a solution more than the current leaderships on both sides are willing to give. Okay. And I think it's absolutely imperative. I think this is somewhere, we can't pray and aid the UN, Richard, and say they've asked the parties to get going on this. We've got to recognise that, one, the international community has actually got to lead this, and if the quartet's not willing to lead it, then the UN Security Council should be leading it. And secondly, it can't just be an Israel-Palestine solution. Security for the Israelis has to come from the whole of the Arab world, and support for the Palestinians has to come from the whole of the Arab world too. It's a regional solution.
Now, let's come back to Afghanistan. We've got a question from Ian Church, who happens to be a bomb disposal officer. Ian Church.
The war on terror is unwinnable. Are negotiations with Al-Qaeda inevitable to ensure a satisfactory end to the war on terrorism?
Liam Fox.
No, not Al-Qaeda, but I think that it's reasonable to make the assumption that you will not solve the problem in Afghanistan today by military means alone. I know very few people who believe that to be true. The question is, who do you talk to and about what? And I think that you therefore have to look for the people who are reconcilable to the idea in the Afghan constitution, in the way that the country is moving, and how it relates to the countries in the region and the wider world. Hopefully, events are moving in that direction. In Helmand province, just to take a tiny example, where our own forces are, we've seen a big reduction in violence levels throughout this year. We're seeing a 25% reduction. It does tend to suggest that the counterinsurgency, rather than a purely counter-terrorist strategy, is beginning to reap some rewards.
Why, sorry, can I interrupt you a moment? Why, if British governments, successive British governments, were willing to talk to the IRA, they're not willing to talk to, if they can find Al-Qaeda, whatever Al-Qaeda may be, to talk to Al-Qaeda?
Well, the question is not whether we are, the question is whether the Afghan government is. It has to be an Afghan-led process. We're there and we've said we would support them, and if they're able to find elements of the, let's call them the former Taliban, although this is a relatively broad grouping, who are willing to cooperate with the sort of direction that the people of Afghanistan and their government want to take, then they should engage with them. There has always to be a political solution to any insurgency and any conflict, but finding the people who are willing to do that is a difficult job, and we have also to, I think, accept that there will be some people who will always be irreconcilable. And